It's Saturday, 7th of June 2025. Barbara and I board a train, taking in the scenery as we journey onward. As we chat and wonder about what lies ahead, we have no inkling that we are en route to a remarkable gathering. People from all walks of life brought together by a shared commitment to justice and truth. Our destination is Hereford, Lucy Letby's hometown. It's no accident that this location was chosen for the first public meeting, thoughtfully organised and led by the 19 nurses, a collective of healthcare professionals with varied expertise across the nursing spectrum. The co-founders and members of the 19 nurses have chosen and continue to remain anonymous, allowing their collective voice to speak louder than any individual name. Their strength lies in their solidarity. A brief word of caution: some clips and footage may appear awkward or disjointed. These edits were necessary to protect the anonymity of certain individuals, and we kindly ask for your understanding in advance. The meeting opened with a powerful statement from one of the co-founders outlining their mission to ensure that the voices of healthcare professionals are central to critical decision-making. Their current focus is on advocating for an independent review of the Lucy Letby case, driven by the belief that transparency and accountability are vital to restoring public trust and protecting patient care. A powerful statement was also delivered by someone close to Lucy Letby. Though both their identity and words shall remain undisclosed, it is enough to say that they came to express heartfelt gratitude to those gathered, people who, in their words, refused to remain silent in the face of injustice. They spoke of the urgent need to restore faith in our legal system, to protect every nurse who faces immense challenges in their daily work, and above all, to prevent an innocent woman from spending the best years of her life and possibly the rest of her days behind bars. For the sake of justice, they declared, our voices will be heard. Dr. Roger Norwich, a retired medical consultant, delivered a compelling and detailed overview of the Letby case. Beginning with the early stages, he outlined the involvement of key figures such as Dr. Breary and Dr. Jairam, raising concerns about their participation in the investigation despite being central witnesses. He also noted how some individuals appeared to use the case as a platform for personal recognition. Dr. Norwich criticised several police actions, particularly the pre-dawn arrest filmed by media, suggesting it was designed to publicly vilify Lucy Letby. He questioned the decision to allow complainants and expert witnesses to be involved in the investigation, calling it a serious conflict of interest. Focusing on expert testimony, he challenged the objectivity and methodology of the prosecution's lead expert, Dr. Dewey Evans. Norwich argued it was implausible for Evans to build the case and then be presented as an independent witness. He highlighted several flaws in Evans' testimony, including assumptions about infant stability, overfeeding, and the failure to consider critical obstetric histories. Other experts, including Dr. Bohen, were also criticized for offering narrow perspectives and misrepresenting academic research, particularly a paper by Dr. Shu Lee. The media came under fire too, with Dr. Norwich referring to journalists such as Liz Hole and Judith Moritz as cheerleaders for the prosecution. He further condemned the Crown Prosecution Service, noting the successive directors of public prosecutions failed to intervene despite judicial criticism, specifically from Judge Jackson, regarding the reliability of expert witnesses. Dr. Norwich also addressed the prosecuting counsel's courtroom rhetoric, which he described as bordering on misogynist at times and unfairly targeting Letby during cross-examination. He held these practices, as the judge's failure to challenge them, responsible for contributing to miscarriages of justice. Finally, criticised Judge Goss for ignoring warnings from a fellow judge and refusing to admit a critical report for the Royal College of Paediatric and Child Health, which exposed serious dysfunction at the Countess of Chester Hospital. Norwich also highlighted that the judge's conduct heavily favoured the prosecution, undermining the fairness of the trial. He concluded,
During the passage of 14 years since the Law Commission report, nothing has been done to properly define or control who is a medical expert. They remain largely self-appointed. Dewey Evans pitched up to the police, giving his CV as somebody who had done a lot of this sort of thing, and it was his kind of a case. We wish he hadn't, and I think in the end he will wish he hadn't. But these people remain largely self-appointed, and many of them act as hired guns and don't give the information which is required under the civil procedure rules. It's clear that no lessons have been learned from very similar cases of false convictions of nurses like Lucy Letby in Holland and Daniela Poggiali in Italy, where their cases are also largely based on fraudulent statistical evidence. So it's very urgent that a complete overhaul of the way in which cases involving complex medical and technical issues are treated, to ensure that these matters are now in the future dealt with by panels of proper and respected experts who can advise the court, rather than the current adversarial system where two lawyers, neither of whom probably know what they're talking about, trying to score points off each other.
Yes, game.
So under the current system, there are no nurses or carers who can go to work safely without risking becoming victim of a miscarriage of justice. Had a proper system been in place, Lucy Letby would never have been charged. But investigations would have been conducted by a proper medical panel that would have identified the root causes of the deaths and near misses at Chester. The RCPCH report, which was suppressed by Judge Goss, was never shown to the jury, but they were well on the way to uncovering the truth. Why the doctors who wrote that report didn't try and intervene at any stage, and I don't know that they didn't intervene, but we heard nothing to suggest that they had. Why they didn't, I have no idea. But it's now up to you, nurses, carers, members of the public, to get out there and publicise this outrageous injustice, because you could all be enveloped by it. So please contact your MP, contact your professional bodies and trade unions. Don't do nothing, as every day that Lucy remains in jail, her life is drifting away, and she remains in danger from other prisoners. So please don't do nothing.
I was the next speaker, and I started with a challenge.
I always start with a little experiment. Can somebody tell me what they see? Do you see a bite mark here? For those who do, could you please raise your hand?
Can't be sure.
Okay.
Can you repeat the question?
Does this look like a bite mark to you?
I don't know fucking know.
But if you think it's not, or you think it's a bruise or something else, please do raise your hand. It's interesting, isn't it? It's a room full of intelligent people, yet we don't know what we're seeing. But here's the twist. If I present this photo to 10 odontologists, the bite mark experts, they will have the same reaction as we do. Some of them will swear it's a bite mark. Others will say, no, it's not. And few will say it's inconsistent, which in a courtroom means guilt anyway. However, we're here today because we share a deep concern over the case of a young woman who is facing life imprisonment based on evidence which was questionable already from the very beginning. Now, a panel of eminent experts have confirmed that that evidence was not only flawed, but was selectively presented, overlooking numerous non-criminal factors that could explain the tragic death of many infants at the Countess of Chester Hospital. So we felt imperative to advocate for meaningful reform, and in this brief talk I will share case studies, historical parallels, and the urgent need for structural changes. And in fact, we will introduce our proposed new model for reform. I'm sure you are familiar with those cases, certainly with the Lucy Letby case. Colin Norris, now known as Colin Campbell at the moment at the Court of Appeal, and Peter Sullivan. Now, all three cases reveal serious flaws, and our expert evidence is used in criminal trials. Norris shows how evolving science can overturn once trusted conclusions. The Lucy Letby trial shows and highlights the power of ambiguous testimony without direct evidence. And the Sullivan case exposes the dangers of misapplied forensics and the need for ongoing review. Together, these cases spotlight a systemic failure. These are not isolated incidents. They reflect a disturbing pattern within our justice system. We are seeing repeated issues, a lack of consensus among experts, scientific foundations that are either weak or outdated, and the worrying tendency for courts to place undue weight on expert opinion. This isn't just about improving the quality of individual experts. This is about an urgent need for a systemic reform, structural changes that address how experts are evaluated, presented, and challenged in court. Now, this is not a new debate. This debate echoes earlier discussions following the cases of Sally Clark and Angela Cummings. Their convictions were based on flawed medical evidence and represented more than isolated errors. They exposed failures across multiple levels of the criminal justice system. even though these cases spark outrage, nothing was done. No change at all. Now, I know it is tempting to place a blame on a single expert, but in our view, that would be overlooking the deeper issue. Without broader procedural reform, the criminal justice system risks repeating the very miscarriages of justice, the claims to guard against. To restore confidence, as we say, the justice system must improve methods for vetting, presenting, and evaluating expert evidence, and most importantly, must accept that accountability does not lie with a single expert, but with the entire legal framework that enables their use in court. In 2005, that's 20 years ago, the House of Commons Science and Technology Committee published its report called Forensic Science on Trial, and the key takeaways were again call for oversight, better training, clearer processes. Nothing was done. As a result of that committee concerns, the Law Commission in 2009 launched a public consultation on expert evidence on trial, and in 2011, in its report, concluded that expert opinion were too easily admitted under the common law practice, and that was often without proper scrutiny or reliability checks. Citing miscarriages of justice such as those of Sally Clark and Angela Cummings, the Commission called for a new statutory test to ensure that only reliable evidence reaches juries. In brief, the Law Commission recommendations can be summarized as follows. Judges must test reliability before allowing expert evidence before a jury, introduce fixed scientific criteria such as peer review or testability, error rates, etc. Train judges to understand science, emphasize expert impartiality, encourage experts to agree what they don't agree with at the beginning, before the trial. These ideas, by the way, mirror international standards, yet they were not implemented. So despite clear guidance, the government chose the status quo, arguing that existing rule and case law were sufficient. This was despite concerns from critics saying that these measures weren't enough to prevent fraud science in court. Now, the Lucy Letby's conviction is a stark reminder that the deep-rooted issues exposed in those earlier cases still remain and continue to undermine the integrity of our criminal justice system. Now, the Law Commission recommendations could have made a difference to Lucy Letby's case. However, we don't believe that even those recommendations would be sufficient to make a change. That is because we think that the Law Commission proposals place too much discretion in the hands of judges. Judges are not experts, and expecting them to assess complex evidence is unrealistic. Reform needs to support the judiciary rather than give them more responsibility. So this is our model for reform. We believe that a better response will be to establish, first of all, an independent expert evidence council, a national body to vet, accredit, and provide guidance to expert witnesses. This will shift the authority from judges to an expert-led institution which can issue guidance, maintain registries, and more importantly, flag up unreliable experts, which is what we needed in the case of Lucy Letby. 2, mandatory joint or court-appointed experts. No longer adversarial system. Appoint experts that both parties agree on. 3, clear statutory criteria. Codify a statutory reliability test with fixed criteria. Peer review, we have already discussed about that, a statutory reliability test, error rate, testability, inspired on the US Dobbert standard model applied uniformly. This would limit arbitrary decision-making by judges and anchors admissibility in objective standards. Expert advisors for the judges. Let court appoint scientific advisors or panels in complex cases, not for fact-finding, but to help interpret conflicting expert testimony. This would create a shared responsibility between judges and advisors and will enhance both understanding and legitimacy. Jury aids and scientific explainers. Let's use vetted visual aids, glossary, or third-party explainers so that we can support jury comprehension. And this would empower juries to engage with experts more directly so that they don't have to rely on judges' summaries. And a post-conviction review panel. Establish a specialist appellate body or a panel to re-evaluate cases involving questionable expert evidence. This would prevent individual judges from acting as unaccountable gatekeepers at trial, as we saw with Judge Goss. Reforming expert evidence isn't just a matter of cleaning up courtroom silence. It's about truth, it's about accountability, it's about justice delayed for some, denied for too many. For every conviction based on flawed testimony, there is a shattered life, a family broken, and an entire system compromised. Despite many warnings, action has been minimal. The time for change is now. Reform is both a legal and an ethical necessity. This isn't a policy discussion, it's about real life. When expert evidence fails, justice fails with it. Let's not allow that failure to continue. Please do support our reform.
Michael O'Brien was the next speaker.
I just want to briefly mention who I am. I was one of the Cardiff News Agent 3 who spent 11 years and 42 days in prison for a crime I didn't do, together with my 2 coaches, Ellis and Dan Cole. I've been working in miscarriages of justice since my release in '98. I wrote 8 books on the subject. I'm writing my 9th, which is going to be included. I just feel sad that after 26 years since I've been out, I'm still fighting miscarriage of justice cases. It should not be. So what lessons have been learned? None at all. And Lucy's case, in my view, with all the miscarriages I've investigated, Lucy's is the worst which have ever hit this country. Simple as that. There's no other case. And I draw parallels with the Birmingham Six. I don't know if you remember the Birmingham Six. Right? Now, there was an expert in that case, Dr. Frank Scoos, who reckons that nitroglycerine was found on the Birmingham Six hand. Well, it transpires you get it from a packet of plain.
Yes.
Yeah? So he was a charlatan. Let me make no mistake about it. From what I've heard about this Dowie Evans, he's on the same path. And he can be discredited, there's no doubt about it. But then there's the CCRC. Now, I've come here today not to, knock the CCRC. Now's not the time. I've done that last week. I've said my piece. They've got a new person in. Let's just hope the CCRC is as powerful as they were when they were in my day. Mine was one of the first cases referred by the Criminal Case Review Commission, and they've done a fantastic job back in those days. But the honeymoon period was over. Now they got to be counted. Now they got to send Lucy's case back to the Court of Appeal without delay, with a significant new evidence which has come out, which has not been placed before. Any judge, any jury, it's got to be referred. It's got to be fast tracked. Justice delayed is justice denied. And I always say this as well: a miscarriage of justice does not lie doormat in the grave. It will rise up and hold all and each and every one of them. Make no mistake about that. Like mine did. They thought they could bury it. But the lies which gets told about you, not to the extent of Lucy's, but I've had an experience of that. And I also can tell you there is another miscarriage of justice victim I've managed to get on board, a guy called Paul Blackburn. You might want to do a bit of research on Paul. He's done 25 years for something he never done. And somebody's going to read out a statement. He couldn't be here today, unfortunately. But I've managed to get a statement from him. And we both support each and every one of you, what you're doing, the experts. And if there's anything we can do, rest assured we're going to do it. It's as simple as that. And I know the pain Lucy's family have gone through. I watch my family go through it. My mother and father are not here to see how far I've come. When I first come out, I was a mess. Absolute mess. I had mental health problems. I didn't know the cope. We're going to make sure when Lucy comes out, she has the right support. It took me 4 years to get the help I needed, and there was none of this, school and see a psychiatrist will sort this out for you. It's a PTSD. I didn't know what was wrong with me. But when I found out, and I'm not going to believe this, after 26 years, I am now getting treatment called EMDR treatment. I don't know if many of you are familiar with that. I've had to fight for 26 years to get this treatment because of my wrongful conviction. We're going to make sure all this is not going to happen to Lucy. No way is it going to happen to another victim of a miscarriage of justice. I wrote to Lucy as well. I don't know whether she got my letter. I don't know. She probably gets so many, within the realms of everything. And then again, it depends how petty they are in prison, whether they're allowed to see her. But I bring hope today because I am here because of the Criminal Cases Review Commission. I am a free man because of it. Let's hope Lucy's next. That's all I've got to say on the matter. I'm not going to bore you with any more detail. If any of you want to look on the website, I've got my own website, www.cardiffnewsagent3.com. Anything you want to know about my case and the work I've done is all on there. It's being updated, so there's more going to be added. But today is Lucy's Day, and let's not forget why we're all here for Lucy. She is going to get justice. We're going to do it.
Yeah, she is.
We are going to do it.
Yeah,
We always
yeah.
talk about it. Thank you very much.
We should have bought the alcohol, and I want to make a very, very simple point. And it's this. I'm a bear with a very little brain. And this is confusing, and I'm not really a zoologist. I'm also a dinosaur. And I believe in something very simple, that somebody is innocent or proven guilty. And that means that Lucy Letby is innocent. And there's another thing. And Lucy Letby is in prison because of a catastrophic failure of the National Health Service and the police and the prosecution and the judges and the judiciary to do their jobs properly. There's a series of catastrophic failures, and they have blamed this poor innocent woman for a series of mistakes that were not her fault. Now, you may have listened to our podcast.
Yes, yes.
Lucy, who's out there, was and she's the lady in the orange t-shirt. That's Lucy, who was the researcher. Who was the person who was a researcher with the Great New Yorker piece. And then she helped Ed Abel Smith and I do our thing, and obviously she's very and then she helped David Rose with the story about Dr. Ravi Jairam, who said that Lucy did nothing when the baby was baby K, but it was suffering. And then there's an email said at the day or the next day saying that Lucy did get my attention, i.e. that's straight to the Court of Appeal. So what's the problem? The problem is too many powerful people are embarrassed and ashamed of a series of mistakes. But I'm a reporter and I know what a story is. And it's not a story when the police bang somebody up who's done it. That's not a story. But for Panorama, my old programme, for Panorama to do a story like here's this witch, you know, this terrible woman. No, I'm sorry. But the story is when the police bang somebody up. And there is no crime.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And to be honest with you, and how do I put this is at my most diplomatic, the editor of Panorama doesn't understand the nature of journalism. The Cheshire Police.
Yeah, that's right.
Giving money to the Daily Mail. I mean, Ed and I, we crowdfunded ours, and to be honest with you, the crowdfunder couldn't even pay for the lawyer. But actually, both Ed and I and Chalk and Blade, the people who we used their studio and put the thing together, we thought this. And on the day Lucy Letby was convicted the first time, I tweeted that sometimes the law gets it wrong. And my agent, my book agent, phoned me up immediately and said, "Yeah, that fucking tweet down this week." And I got a lot of abuse and a lot of hate. But to be honest, I'm a war reporter, and I was in Ukraine at the time. I've got my flak jacket and helmet, and I thought, no, I think this is wrong. And I'll tell you why, because I reported on Stanley Clark when she was in prison, when she was still a murderer. And it all starts with statistics. And that's what drove me to write that tweet. And it's very, very simple. Is that Sally Clark was banged up on the basis of rubbish statistics. And Lucy Letby has been banged up on the basis of rubbish statistics. And so let's all be clear. I was terrible at maths at school. So I'm not saying I know much about statistics. I do know how to tell a story, and what I did was I got hold of statisticians who told me what the story was. And the story is simple. Statisticians, they want to look at everything. They want to look at the story in the round, all the information. So, Roy Meadow said the chances of Sally Clark having 2 cot deaths because she was a middle-class non-smoker, the chances of 1 are 8,500 to 1. Of 2, you multiply 8,500 by 8,500, 73 million to 1. That is nonsense. And it's nonsense because the moment your horse wins the Grand National, I don't have a horse, but never mind, the moment your horse wins the Grand National, the chances of it winning another horse race, the St. Leger, are very, very high. The chances of having a cot death, and they're brothers, right? They're brothers, the chances of having a second cot death are very high because they're brothers. 1 in 60. Not 73 million to 1. What's the statistics in Lucy Letby? There was a chart all of the suspicious cases, murder, let's go with the murders, murder, and Lucy Letby's that. Dowie Evans, he told us, and we interviewed him, that he didn't see, he wasn't aware of the people there, but their names or their initials were on the medical reports, and he saw that. And then he actually, during the course of the interview, he changed his mind about that. So, and the jury got that, and that was the lead point by, for example, the BBC, the Mail, everybody who was there. In my view, in your view, I'm sure, burning the witch that day. Lucy's responsible. Every time a baby dies, Lucy's on shift. But there's another chart. The chart of the non-suspicious events. And guess what? Who's not there? Lucy Letby. Why didn't the jury see the other charts? Why didn't the jury see and ask or know who made the selection? Suspicious event, Lucy's always there. Non-suspicious event, Lucy's never there. Two charts, the whole picture, and that was denied. And that's the start of it. Then you've got Dowie Evans. Anyway, so the point was he was a politician inside by Congress. So he has all of the politician's skills. He's good. He's good in the courtroom, all of that stuff. But was he telling the truth? So, simple questions. How many papers on neonatology has Dowie Evans written? And you did one at university, but afterwards, can you answer the question? Zero. Let's hear it louder. Shuley? 300 plus. 300 plus. So, you can't work out that a doctor who has written no papers at all on neonatology might possibly be talking off his arm.
Yeah.
And he's no longer a practicing doctor.
Yeah.
And it changes
Yeah.
this stuff that's happening.
Yeah, it does.
So what we've got, and then, I could go on forever, but we're running late. And so it's simple. Our first episode. And what was fun is I no longer work for the BBC, so I can call it, Ed and I can call it.
That's like bullshit.
So it was a hospital full of shit. But there was a problem at the Countess of Chester Hospital because of underfunding, because of skimping and saving, there wasn't the pipe work in the neonatal unit was 40 years old. It was cast iron and it cracked and it blocked, and that meant on a regular basis there was a sewage problem. There was one defence expert at her trial, and that itself is a tragedy. And that itself, there was a failure by her first defence team to do a proper job. No question about that. But the one expert was good, and he was the plumber, because he was cleaning up the shit or trying to. But there was a real problem with bacteria. These babies were sick. And were the doctors at the hospital good? It looks to me like Ravi Jayram, a doctor, but he wasn't putting his back into it. And this is a proper job. So is it possible this was a terribly badly run hospital full of shit?
Yes.
And was Lucy Letby one of the very, very few people who was smart enough and good enough and brave enough to say, we're not doing a proper job? That sounds like witch burning, yeah? But the person who's been burnt as a witch isn't a witch. She's telling the truth. I believe that this is a monstrous crime. That this poor woman has been locked up, and she's almost certainly losing the possibility of her ever having children. For multiple murders, her family have been horribly treated, and she has been horribly treated, and she did nothing wrong. So
he closed by reinforcing Dr. Norwich's call to action, urging people to write to their MPs and raise their voices to ensure this case receives the thorough review it deserves. The next speaker was Steve Phelps, a writer with an MA in creative writing and a television producer whose work includes Rough Justice, Watchdog and Dispatches for the BBC and Channel 4. He delivered a powerful and thought-provoking speech aptly titled "Innocence Has Nothing to Do with It."
Unfortunately, it's my job to pour a bit of cold water on proceedings, because I'm going to have to talk about the hurdles between where we are now and getting this girl released and getting her exonerated. And these hurdles are very, very substantial. So I'm going to talk about the post-conviction phase and the role of both the CCRC and, crucially, the Court of Appeal and how it will approach this case. I'll also say a bit about the CCRC, the real possibility test, and the erosion of that organisation over its nearly 30-year existence, and something about the tension between these two organisations. So there are two things to bear in mind really about these organisations. First of all, that the CCRC is a review commission, not a reinvestigation committee, and it's structured and resourced so that when they do investigate, they will generally ask the original police force to reinvestigate itself. We can all see the problems with that. And the second, and this is really crucial, is that the Court of Criminal Appeal is a court of law, not a court of justice. And they never look at cases to see, as it were, what is the right solution here. You know, what is the truth of the matter? They don't regard that as their job. Now, you know, when I was doing this work, I should say, by the way, for those of you who don't know, my background is 12 years as a television producer making stories about programs about miscarriages of justice, rough justice, and then trial and error for Channel 4. And it's a shame we haven't been able to do it for the last 25 years, but there you go. And in our experience then, the only way you got to the bottom of any of these cases was by approaching them in a collegiate manner. You know, we had lots and lots of meetings where somebody would bring to it specific knowledge of a case, and other people would bring to that meeting their knowledge of the systems in general and the way things malfunction, and out of that you would find a way forward. And it seems to me that the CCRC is not structured in that way anymore. It may well have been at the beginning, but it isn't anymore, you know, and you even get a situation where a case review manager can look at a case, provide a report on it, which goes to a single commissioner, and that single commissioner can reject the case. So that's rubber stamp. I mean, this is just to give you the general background of how the organisation is. And I think it's going to be very difficult for the CCRC not to refer this case. But, you know, even if they do refer it, they're not referring it on the right basis. They're not really going to refer it on the basis of getting their heads around all the facts. Now, one ex-CCRC commissioner that I know very well said to me in relation to this case, he said, you've got to be very careful, because if you put in front of the Criminal Cases Review Commission a large stack of very detailed evidence, they will not even have the time to read it, you know. And he said, it's not quite this bad, but it's almost as though you have to go to them with bullet points, you know. Now, you know, I think and I hope things are going to be different in this case, because there is such a sort of overwhelming sense of public disquiet about it, and that the Shu Lee report seems to me to be something on which, you know, if they're going to turn down this case, they'd have to do some very, very hard work to show that they've got other experts who are better than those experts, you know. So, but they will be trying to cover all the bases before they refer it. Vera Baird, who's been appointed as the interim chair, is, I think, a good thing, and maybe will kind of get things going. But obviously they're in a state of stasis at the moment, because they're so undermined by what's been going on recently. And one would hope that this doesn't mean that it'll be a long time before they're able to make a decision, you know. And Vera Baird, at least, is the sort of person who might be able to simply say, we've got to get on with this. But if it was being dealt with in the normal way, it would be a very, very long time before they got through it, because there's so much material there and they have to make sure all the bases are covered before it goes to the Court of Appeal. Case review managers are dealing with 30 cases at any one time. We used to, when we were doing trial and error, if we were asked how many cases we were looking at, the answer would be there's something like 80 on the books, of which not very many were capable of making programs, but there were 80 that we were looking at over a period of time. But then that's a whole team of people, not case review manager. Of course, the other thing is that the legal aid system has been run down too, so that referrals to the CCRC made by solicitors used to be a third of all referrals. That's now down to 3%. So 97% of the people applying to the CCRC are doing it by themselves, you know, and this is not the best way to do it. So a key issue with the CCRC is the real possibility test, which I'm sure most of you know a bit about. And that's really a source of tension with the Court of Appeal, because they're only supposed to refer cases where they think there is a real possibility that it might be quashed. And that, of course, requires them to make a decision about whether it should be quashed. And the Court of Appeal don't like this. The Court of Appeal have never really liked the CCRC, which they see as an organisation which is usurping some of their responsibilities. The Law Commission are proposing a change in that, and hopefully this will go through to what they call a non-predictive test, so that they're able to refer things that they think the Court of Appeal should be looking at again, but without having to make any kind of judgment about whether it deserves to be allowed or not. And this will probably lead to more referrals, but a lower rate of success. But it seems to me that, you know, actually getting your case on the desk of the Court of Appeal is, you know, the first and most important thing, because we must remember that in the case of Lucy, all these, you know, 14 experts, 700-page reports, things like that, they are as nothing other than the only thing that matters is what does the Court of Appeal say, because they are the only people who can release her and exonerate her. So how the case is presented to the Court of Appeal, ultimately, you know, via the CCRC, is crucial. And that in itself is a very difficult thing, and, you know, possibly not one where, you know, you think the idea is just to put all this evidence, this very persuasive evidence, in front of them, but somehow to reduce it all in a way that is both persuasive and succinct and does not require people to read endless screeds of medical evidence. And of course, we've got to remember that the Court of Appeal are no more medical experts than any of the barristers and judge at the original trial, you know. And in a case which is rather similar to this, you know, has some similarities at any rate, it was said to me that the solicitor involved a commissioner barrister who wrote an 80-page document to go to the Court of Appeal. And when the solicitor looked at that, he didn't think it was quite right. It was not succinct enough, not clear enough. And he then instructed another barrister who came back with a 12-page document, which he said was, well, he said it was a work of art. And it was that 12-page document that got the conviction quashed. So, you know, I'm just trying to give you a sense of how all this material, this overwhelming amount of material, you know, somehow has to be funneled down for the Court of Appeal in a way that makes it difficult for them to turn it down. One should never, by the way, underestimate the importance of public opinion, because, you know, they like to maintain they're not affected by public opinion, but of course they are. They're human beings, you know. It matters. Public opinion matters, and in this case, more than any other I can think of. So, so the Court of Appeal. Let's look at the Court of Appeal itself. As I said, it's court of law, not of justice. They do not substitute themselves for the role of the jury. They say, you know, fundamental of of justice in this country that cases are tried by a jury and not by judges. And so what they are doing is trying, this is the way it's supposed to work, they're trying to look for a situation where they can say the original case has gone wrong in some way. And that is why we have to quash the verdict of the jury, but they don't substitute themselves, because they hardly ever say this person is innocent. What they say is there's something wrong with the original conviction and therefore it cannot stand. And then you get to the issue of retrials, which is, in my experience, varies a lot. Sometimes they order retrials, they're in the habit of ordering a lot of retrials, and sometimes they don't. Retrials are problematic because we know, don't we, that you are not allowed simply to go back to the Court of Appeal and say there's something wrong here. You have to have new evidence not available at the time of the trial, or some misdirection by the judge by and large. But if they order a retrial, it's possible for the prosecution to mount a completely different case. There's no requirement on them to mount the case in the same way they did before. And we had that in the instance of a man called Sean Jenkins, who was convicted of killing his foster daughter. And the conviction was quashed, the first conviction was quashed, and then a second trial was ordered, and their case differed in some very fundamental ways from the original trial. So retrials are a bit of a problem. And personally, I cannot see how, if they quash this conviction, they could ever order a retrial. Because if they do, it will be on the basis, largely, of the Shuley Committee's report. And so the case being put forward to them and being forwarded by the CCRC will be one that there were no murders. So how can you try somebody again when there have not been any murders? So I'm rather hopeful that the retrial business will disappear out the window, and that's an argument I think we could all keep putting forward, you know. Oh, by the way, one thing that amazed me about the case, I mean, you know, as a journalist, I'm journalists like John, like David back there, like Closey, and you know, when you look at this case, when I first looked at it, the first thing I did was pick up the phone and try and get in touch with Lee and Tanswell, you know, because their paper is so crucial. But neither the prosecution nor the defence did that. You know, how can that be?
Yeah.
But the other thing is this business of innocence has a great deal to do with compensation, doesn't it? Because if you're quashing a conviction but saying we say nothing about this girl's innocence or guilt, you know, then that's very different from saying, as they should say, there were no murders, this girl is innocent, and look at what has been done to her, and that must be compensated. Yeah. Now, another thing about the whole business of these cases going through the CCRC and the Court of Appeal is a big worry to me, which stems, I think, most recently from the Malkinson case. I think there's a danger that they're moving towards a position where they will only quash things on the basis of DNA, because DNA cannot be ignored. And, you know, before DNA fingerprinting, they had to deal with all the aspects of the case. But now, as it were, they can tick some boxes by saying, well, you know, we quashed the Malkinson conviction, we quashed this other conviction or whatever, and these we all turned down. So I think that's a big danger, and that has to be worked on and looked at. When this conviction is quashed, as it surely will be eventually,
absolutely,
there will be consequences for all parts of the state apparatus.
Good.
You know, the police will have to be investigated, how they approach this case. Although, you know, Paul Hughes in the dreadful Operation Hummingbird video denied it, but clearly what they did was to start with a suspect. That's not the way they're supposed to do it, you know, but they did start with a suspect. So they have to answer questions. The CPS has to answer questions. The NHS has to answer, you know, huge number of questions. When there is, after the Beverly Alec case, which many of you will be familiar with, she was convicted in the same way. She may well be innocent in my view, but in any event, they instituted an inquiry, you know, a little bit like the Thirlwell inquiry, slightly more enclosed, called the Clothier inquiry. When the Clothier inquiry looked into a case where this girl had been convicted of murders, what they discovered, of course, was a dysfunctional hospital, a dysfunctional unit and a dysfunctional hospital. And the unit was closed down and everything was moved to a different hospital. And then eventually, I think the hospital itself was shut. Now, you know, that may well happen in terms of the campuses of Chester Hospital, and probably should. The adversarial, a quick word about the adversarial system and the things that Anna was saying about expert evidence and so on, and that Roger was talking about Dowie Evans and Sandy Bogue, you know. And I think there's a huge problem with both medical cases like this and also complex financial cases. And I actually was part of a jury a couple of years ago on a complicated and long, not as long as this, but a long financial case brought by the Serious Fraud Office. And I can tell you that, be careful not to break the law here, but I can tell you that I can't tell you how we decided the case, but I can tell you it wasn't on the basis of a complete understanding of all the financial evidence, you know, because we did not have access to somebody who would explain to us a lot of this financial evidence. And also, as a sidelight to that, you know, lots of people will be telling you out there, when you run into people who think that Lucy is guilty, they will be saying to you, oh, well, you know, you didn't hear everything the jury heard. You know, you did not sit through the entire case and hear all the evidence. Well, juries don't hear all the evidence. Juries only hear the evidence that is chosen to put in front of them. And on the trial where I was in the jury, we sent several questions to the judge saying, we'd like to know this. And the answer always came back, you're not allowed to know that because that's not what's in front of you, you know. So I'm right behind kind of changes. We have to find a new way to deal with cases like this, because juries cannot be expected to get to the bottom of everything that happened in this case. And, you know, 12 good men and true, you know, and women brought in from the street. If it's a case of a pub fight, which leads to somebody dying because they cracked their head on the floor, then, you know, that jury will have much more experience of pub fights than any of the judges or barristers. But they know nothing about the background to a case like this. They are simply the wrong forum, and some other way has to be found. Difficulty with this is that the appeal court is so structured as to make it very difficult to come to the right conclusion on a case like this, and to get their heads around all the evidence and how on earth Mark and whoever acts with him, I hope, after the case is referred, which I hope it will be, you know, that the way in which the grounds of appeal are drawn and put forward in this case is going to be absolutely vital. And, you know, the Court of Appeal will only look at new evidence not available at the time of the trial, you know, or misdirections by the judge. They don't do misdirections by the judge by and large because, you know, they don't like criticising their own. And, you know, so it kind of comes down to new evidence, but they, you know, they will rule out lots of evidence on the grounds that the original barristers could have had that evidence at the time. And I think we're almost in a situation where, you know, the volume of evidence pointing to this girl's innocence is going to somehow, the Court of Appeal is going to have to find its way around its own rules in order to allow this, you know, and let's hope they do, because, you know, this is the most, I mean, I've worked on lots of miscarriages of justice. This is the most egregious of its kind, you know, it's quite extraordinary. And unless they put it right, there's something fundamentally wrong with the system in this country.
The next speaker was Michelle Bates, author of Stand Against Injustice. She shared her personal experience with wrongful conviction as the sister of Barry George, who was wrongly convicted of the murder of TV presenter Jill Dando. She also spoke in her role as a patron of the Jeremy Bamber Innocence campaign.
My brother was convicted in 2001 of the murder of this lovely lady, Jill Dando. And I spent many years fighting get him freed. And it wasn't just a case of getting Barry freed, but you see, if you convict the wrong person for something, how does the victim, so the murder victim, how does that person have justice? How is there justice? There's none. Miscarriages of justice. All of them begin at the investigation stage. There is no miscarriage of justice that you've ever seen that did not start with the police at the investigation. So that means when they gather the evidence. In Mary's case, the police had nothing to go on for a whole year after Jill had been killed. But then they lighted on a person who'd been flagged but not spoken to. Barry is mentally disabled. He has epilepsy, ADHD, acquired brain damage, poor short-term memory due to frontal lobe brain injury, and a learning disability. He was known to police as the local character and someone with a history of odd behaviour and sexual assault on women. My life changed forever in the year 2000. My safe world as a wife and a mother living in Southern Ireland morphed into a life of a campaigner for justice against the might of the British justice system. I didn't see that coming. Today is 25 years later for me, and I'm still speaking at conferences and gatherings like this in support of people that I feel have been wrongly convicted. During that time, I've become quite proficient at spotting the signs that contribute to a wrongful conviction. And even when there is likely to be one, such as with the Lucy Letby case, even before she was charged. I don't want to take too much time discussing our case. It's all in my book. Just to sidetrack a little on the book, when I tried to get this book published, I went to all the usual publishers and they said, oh no, too contentious, no. And as I said, I was a wife and a mother, and I was actually called an enemy of the state because I was fighting the British justice system. So this is what you face when you step forward. So every case needs evidence, and it's the quality and the integrity of that evidence that can lead to a wrongful conviction. Circumstantial evidence only, as opposed to real evidence that links a defendant to the case. And certainly in Barry's case and in Lucy's, that was the case. It was all circumstantial, and there was nothing that linked either one of them to the murders or the killings or the dyings or whatever else. Withholding evidence, well, that happens a lot. Non-disclosure. And again, I've seen this in most of these cases. Cherry picking the evidence to make it fit for defendant. Absolutely also described one as the police putting on blinkers and then not seeing anything by the side of it. Twisting evidence to make it fit the defendant. Yeah, both cases again. Lost evidence or altered evidence. Well, we've certainly heard about that here today, haven't we? And the Jeremy Vamper case. Boy, is there a lot of evidence in that that's being withheld still, and that's almost 40 years. Expert witnesses, again, we've heard a lot about those today. If these are of poor quality, then the evidence will not have integrity. Forensic evidence, they can use it to confuse or misdirect the jury. Used in Barry's case for certain, and I see it in almost every single case of miscarriage of justice.
She listed a series of wrongful convictions and near misses: Ben Ginn, Lucy Letby, Colin Norris, Sally Clark, the Birmingham Six, the Guildford Ford, the Maguire 7, Andrew Markinson, Jeremy Bamber, Michael O'Brien, Raphael Rowe, Robin Garbett, as well as near misses Colin Stagg, Sir Cliff Richard, and she emphasised that these cases should be cited together, not viewed as isolated incidents, but as part of a wider systemic failure. She gave the example of the Darlington nurses and stressed that only through collective action can miscarriages of justice be effectively challenged. She then turned her attention specifically to Lucy Letby and the nurses supporting her, offering the following reflection.
And the reason I brought up the Darlington nurses is because I know that nurses, they face an awful time, either inside or outside of the NHS, if they decide they're going to stand up and speak. They will find their careers cut short, or even worse. Threats will be made. And I've known nurses who have breakdowns because of this stress. But if we look at the example of the Darlington nurses, and I do always keep wanting to call them the Darlington darlings, they stood together. Yes, they were threatened. And yes, they faced intimidation and they faced ridicule, even re-education of the Chinese. But they won. And they did it to protect one of our own. One of their own. One of our own, this group. So if anybody wants to stand up for Lucy Letby, they need to find a group of like-minded nurses or others in the medical profession. What I always think is the NHS, if you come out and you are the only person who stands up, well, what happens? They come along and they just knock you down like one of those whack-a-mole things. You know, yes, get rid of you. We'll find a reason. You've been sacked. If there are 20 of you, they can't hide that. They can hide one. So I just feel, well, am I encouraging you to stand up for Lucy? That's not my place. I can't tell you what to do. I would certainly say, when you stand up, make sure you're only gambling with what you can afford to lose, because you've got to watch out for yourself and your families. But standing up, that's when you receive justice. So thank you so much for your time, and I really hope there's been something in my talk that's been helpful.
Dr. Peter Hayes, a retired senior lecturer in politics at the University of Sunderland, offered a compelling perspective on the evolving dynamics between supporters and critics of Lucy Letby. Hayes' insightful speech, titled Lucy Letby and the Power of the Powerless, explored what may lie ahead in this unfolding narrative.
So in his celebrated essay, The Power of the Powerless, the playwright Václav Havel identified two ways of living in Czechoslovakia under the Eastern Bloc. There was living a lie and living the truth. Those living the truth were powerless, but at least they had integrity in their lives. Those living a lie conformed to the absurd and immoral demands of a web of power, and so they became a part of it. In his own commitment to living the truth, Havel did not just speak in defiance of the web of power, he also co-founded Charter 77, which asked the Czechoslovak authorities to uphold their commitment to the 1975 Helsinki Accords on Human Rights. Charter 77 then challenged the self-worth of people living a lie by highlighting the emptiness of their human rights claims. So no wonder Havel ended up in prison for 4 years. In Czechoslovakia, everyone was trapped in a web of power of repression and propaganda. In Miss Letby's case, a web of power surrounds her. She has been convicted and remains in prison on the core lies that her trial was fair, and it was really the culmination of a witch hunt, and that she's guilty in this claim, which she's not. To maintain these core lies, however, other lies have been woven into the propaganda and repression of the web of power. Thus, the bullying of the powerless nurse by powerful, not particularly competent consultants is reframed as a David and Goliath struggle of conscientious doctors against powerful and scrupulous managers. Witch hunting is reframed as whistleblowing, and when between September 2023 and July 2024, rational discussion was prohibited and only propaganda was permitted, that was said to have ensured a fair retrial. So, as this web of propaganda which has been spun around Miss Letby has expanded, Harville's analysis and comparison of living a lie and living the truth becomes increasingly helpful in understanding the choices people make in the affair. Now, of course, many people choose to ignore the matter altogether. There's been nothing to do with that. This complacency is questionable, I think, but I will nonetheless start by considering only those who are engaged with the issue of Miss Letby's guilt or innocence. So let's then turn to living a lie. Human beings, Harville argues, have a conscience and a sense of reason that tells them whether what they do and say is sincere, which is the truth, or whether it is insincere but conforming to the demands of power, which is living a lie. The primary explanation for why we act insincerely when power demands it is simply because we are afraid of the consequences of sincerity. And some people frankly acknowledge living insincerely from fear. However, this is not only uncomfortable to our conscience, but also to our sense of dignity. So we tend to hide our fears both from others and ourselves through sophistry, sophistic ways of maintaining that living a lie is upholding the truth, and through some form of rationalisation. You can rationalise lies as well as well-intentioned, noble lies, because by being insincere now, you can be in a better position to be sincere in the future. That's just an example of a rationalisation. But living a lie is not just about fear. It can also bring about positive advantages, getting ahead in one's career, increasing one's status, and enjoying perks. So our desires, as well as our fears, can overcome the dictates of conscience and reason. Let's then think about how fear, sophistry, so-called noble lying, and pursuing advantages apply in the Lucy Letby affair. Let's turn first to fear. So the fear that undergirds the web of power surrounding Miss Letby is manifested by crude and overt threats, such as the contempt of court threat was imposed on all of us between 2023 and 2024. It was more so when we've seen the threats of manslaughter charges being used to intimidate the former managers at the Countess of Chester Hospital. However, the more psychologically effective fear generated by the web of power is one that is sort of vague and insidious and infectious. Those trying to help Miss Letby by challenging the absurdity and immorality of the web of power that is spun around her are living the truth. Now, living the truth involves stating what you honestly think publicly in your name. For a financially secure, redundant, and older person, me, this is an easy step. And it should be easy for everyone. We have the Human Rights Act, defending free speech. And we have various policies stating that honesty should not yield to power, including the duty of candour and the freedom to speak up in the NHS. But as Harville found out, Charter 77, fine words do not always convey realities. For someone whose income and career aspirations are tied to the National Health Service, to live the truth is a huge step, and those who take it deserve huge credit. We'll move on to something called small-scale work, which is quite important in Harville's thought, and it's quite interesting for Lucy Letby. Most people are not actively involved in the Lucy Letby affair, and amongst them are people who will be engaged in what Harville calls small-scale work. And these are people who listen to their conscience and who, by reason, probably because of their career as a healthcare professional, they can't be aware of our own making. And when they are absurd and wrong, well, then they can be changed. The outcome of the Lucy Letby affair may depend on how many of those engaged in small-scale work continue to make minimal concessions to living a lie, and how many choose to live the truth. Let me then think about the future, and there is, I think, a risk of an expanding web of power. Living a lie has an expansionist dynamic. To defend a lie, it requires more lies, more repression, more propaganda. And if this expansive dynamic continues, ultimately rational constraints on the misuse of power will break down. Which is why I think that people who believe that Miss Letby's case has nothing to do with them may be being complacent. However, Harville's analysis allows for a more positive outcome, a more positive possibility. And this is epitomised by the power of the powerless, his famous phrase. So all structures depend on agency. Therefore, the web of power that encircles Miss Letby continues only so long as people choose to participate in it. If the lies are exposed, if the mental gymnastics they entail are shown to be sophistry, if those who are silent are shown to be timid when boldness is needed, then more and more people may choose to live the truth. And for every person who does, it becomes easier for others to follow them. They're less isolated and less exposed. When enough people decide that to maintain their own sense of integrity, they must live the truth, then the web of power will collapse. And that is the power of the powerless. There's a diagram which illustrates just that. And that's what I'm going to say. So thank you.
The next speaker was Christopher Morris, a freelance writer and author. He spoke about his forthcoming book titled Reasonable Doubt, which is currently in the process of publication. He is also the host of the Lucy Letby Analysis YouTube channel.
So the working title of this book is Reasonable Doubt, which Julie came up with. And I knew it was a really good title as soon as you said it. And then the subtitle is Examining the Case of Lucy Letby. So I began the process of writing and research. I should say as well, I'm a full-time freelance writer and I've written and edited over 50 books previously. I'm a published novelist, if you're interested. So I began the process of writing and researching over a year ago now. I've been very fortunate that I've been connected with lots of people, including a couple of researchers who've worked with me. I will release the names of those researchers eventually. They've asked to remain anonymous at this time. So we've looked at every single document from the Thirlwell inquiry, all of the public inquiry, lots of the court transcripts. Where I couldn't get the court transcripts, I've looked at the court reporting. I've basically read every newspaper article you can possibly read about this case. I've watched many videos. I've interviewed over 50 people, including doctors, nurses, scientists, psychiatrists, statisticians, many other relevant professionals, and some people that I can't mention to you at this point. I interviewed Stephen, I didn't mention it, wherever he's gone now. I don't know if he's here, but I've actually interviewed several other speakers today, which wasn't planned at all, but it was just been a happy coincidence. I've really tried to get as much original research material into the book as possible. So there's material that you'll be familiar with, but there's quite a bit of stuff that no one has seen before. And I do have access to some documents that no one has seen before. I've tried to be as generous as I can with sharing stuff, but I've held a few things back to the book, not least because legally I can't share some of those things yet. The reason that I've written this book is simply an attempt to shift the needle in relation to this case, to make a difference to public perception. And I wanted to cite in relation to that the example of the Birmingham 6. So today this is often presented as a success of the appeal system. What isn't usually mentioned is that the first appeal of the Birmingham 6 failed, and there was really obvious evidence that they were innocent. And they were in prison for 16 years. The other thing that isn't usually mentioned is that basically nothing happened at all for 12 years. It was only when there was a World in Action documentary and then a book that anything happened at all.
Yeah.
So when I spoke with Steve Phelps, who's the TV producer who spoke earlier today, he told me something that he reiterated today, which is that public pressure is absolutely critical if you want to overturn a miscarriage of justice. I myself have always believed that from day one, because as we've seen recently with Peter Sullivan, which has been a very timely case for this talk, he was in prison for 38 years, so that's half his life gone, if he lives to the age of 75. If you don't have public pressure, if people don't know about your case, it will be swept under the carpet, and it will be years and then decades before it's actioned. I think there are many different aspects that can contribute to Lucy's inevitable release, but public pressure is critical, because what the system is always scared of, and when I say the system, I mean the criminal justice system, right up to the latest level of state government, is people losing faith in the system itself. Of course, objectively, people should have lost faith in the system already, but there's a very powerful and influential matrix that we all live in. The media is a big component of that.
Yeah.
And that influences all of our perception, even those of us that are aware of it. It's influencing our perception every day. We're all carrying our phones around. It's being literally fed into our heads constantly. That's why we're very lucky in this case to have quality independent journalists working on this case who are in attendance today. And equally, there have been people working within the mainstream media, most notably Sarah Napton, who stuck their neck out to cover this. If we can make this book go viral, it can make a big difference in terms of the public perception of the case, particularly if it's in the mainstream media, which it will be. So I put together a pretty thorough, multifaceted marketing campaign. I've been involved in writing and publishing for many years, so I know how the industry works. And I've got lots of ideas about how to get this book in front of many people as possible. But above and beyond that, I just need your help and support from people that care about Lucy to buy and review the book. I can't emphasize enough how important reviews are. It's the difference between making a small ripple in the pool and a big splash that cannot be ignored. And to reiterate what Stephen was saying, if there's enough public pressure, they'll change their rules.
Yeah.
Because the thing they don't want to see is, oh my God, no one believes in the system anymore. I've actually cited in the book, there's a YouGov poll, and they ask people every year, do you have no faith, some faith, blah, 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 faith in the criminal justice system? And only 4% of people said that they have a lot of faith in the criminal justice system. So 1 in 25 will be pushed out of the community. I'm happy to do more talks in the future. I'm happy to do stuff on Facebook. I'll be doing stuff in the media, starting a YouTube channel, which is called Lucy Letby Analysis. And I just want to finish this speech by quoting a gentleman called Paddy Hill, who sadly passed away recently. He was one of the Birmingham Six, and he simply said the following: "We didn't get our convictions overturned because of the government or the courts. I'll tell you what got our conviction overturned: public outcry." And that is what will get Lucy's conviction overturned, and that is what we need to work for.
The meeting concluded with a closing address from another co-founder of the 19 nurses, outlining the next steps in their advocacy efforts. These include continued support for Lucy Letby, campaigning for expert witness reform, the establishment of independent review panels, improved training for legal professionals, stricter disclosure standards, and the promotion of a safer reporting culture within the NHS. Their broader mission is to raise awareness about the concerns surrounding Lucy Letby's conviction, promote legal transparency, advocate for criminal justice reform, and foster an open, supportive environment for NHS staff. Barbara and I felt a deep sense of integrity, the very quality Dr. Hayes spoke about, untainted by the emptiness that clings to those who live within falsehood. The meeting carried two powerful themes. First, the strength found in unity, powerfully expressed in the speeches of Michelle Bates, Michael O'Brien, and Christopher Morris. And second, the urgent need for systemic reform. This includes not only a re-evaluation of how expert testimony is handled in court, as discussed by Dr. Norwich, Spoken in Justice, and John Sweeny, but also a critical examination of appellate bodies like the CCRC and the Court of Appeal, as emphasized by Steve Phelps. As we left the meeting, what stayed with us wasn't just the speeches, it was the shared sense of integrity, purpose and unity. In a world where silence often prevails, these voices came together to stand for truth, justice and reform. From expert testimony to the role of appellate bodies, and from individuals' courage to collective strength, this gathering reminded us that real change begins when people refuse to look away. In the name of truth and justice, we must keep asking questions, demanding transparency, and standing with those who are unheard. Thank you for watching, and if this message resonated with you, please share it, speak out, and be part of this growing movement, fairness and accountability.